Hey y'all, Chris with Rockin Farm here, coming back with part 5B of the first steps to getting your homestead series. Today we're going to cover a few more steps. Like I said, I sat down to shoot a video. It was way too much info. We're dividing this into 3 videos. So here's part 5B. Now in part 5A, I think I covered what was honestly the most important things to look for when you're looking for a homestead. Bottom line, y'all, if you ain't got water, you ain't got a homestead, period, end of story. We can figure out most everything else. So the next thing I think you should look for after you've looked for, does it have water? Does it have access? And, can I afford it? I think your next thing, go ahead and look and see. Does it have power? Does it have access to power? So some homesteads, some properties, they already have power lines run. They've already got boxes, put on poles or put on sides of barns, put on houses, and then you can run power off of those, et cetera, et cetera. Some, the power only comes to the street and you have to pay to have power brought onto the property, but you know what? That's okay. That's doable. For some, that's not even a real realistic possibility, and you're looking at going off grid. You're looking at solar, you're looking at wind energy, you're looking at running things off of generators. But, just kind of factor all that stuff in. When you're looking for the property, just take a look. What is the power situation and what can I do about the power situation and how much is that going to cost me? Anytime you're talking about doing improvements on a homestead, just take a look at what they're asking for the property itself and then start adding up the things that you're going to have to add to it. Being grid tied ain't the worst thing in the world. At the same time, like we found out here in Texas last winter, sometimes being grid tied, not real fun. My family, we try to do a good job of making sure that we have backup power supply. Being able to have a little bit of backup power is smart no matter what. And if you're off the grid, well, then you might be in a pretty decent situation for having your power backed up. Next, I think it's important to talk about your zoning and your restrictions, y'all, because it don't do a whole lot of good to say, hey, I want to be a homesteader, buy a piece of property, and then find out that you can't have pigs, chickens, cattle, nothing else. I suppose you can have a homestead where you're just growing fruits and trees, but here's another thing too, like Rockin Farm, we're a registered farm with the state of Texas, but I made sure that when I moved here, we were moving in the county. County doesn't have a lot of the laws that the bigger cities in the counties have. And the property we bought was completely unrestricted. So if I want to drag a big school bus out here, paint it pink, park it right on the property line, and use it as a chicken coop, I can do that if I want to. Not saying I'm gonna do that, but I wanted to live in a place where people really couldn't tell me what I could and couldn't do. So if you can, find a place that's completely unrestricted. You may look at your neighbors' properties and be like, wow, that's disgusting. I don't know, y'all. When I look over at some of my neighbors' places, I say that's the look of freedom. And that kind of ties us to another little point. Like, some people get real wrapped up in whether or not the property is clean. Y'all, when you move onto a property that's got a bunch of junk and it's got a bunch of piles and it's got a bunch of stuff and you're not going to want all that there, it's real tempting to just say, hey, let's keep on walking. But y'all, a lot of times you can get a really decent price on a property when the people don't want to clean it up. And it might have a couple of decades or more of junk laying around. But what we discovered when we were cleaning up this property during the first year that we were here, number one, by separating out all the metal, we were able to sell the metal as scrap for cash, which not only paid for all of the trips to the dump, but left a little cash in our pocket. So we got the property cleaned up. It didn't cost us nothing to get the property cleaned up except for some time and, several weekends. But we got all the trash out of here and didn't have to pay to dump none of it because we sold all the scrap and that covered the cost of the dumping. Not only that, but digging through some of this stuff, we found some real treasures. We've got some stuff sitting on our property today that we've still kept out of those old junk piles because, sometimes one person's trash is another person's treasure. And that's going to bring me, I guess, to our last point for today. So this video is going to be a little bit shorter, but the first one, I think we pushed 11 and a half, 12 minutes. The one I'm going to do next is probably going to be about that. So this one here in the middle, it's just going to be a little bit shorter, and that's all right. I didn't want 2 20-minute videos, so we'll just add that in here a little, right? So I think the next thing that's important to talk about is going to be communications, emergency response, things of that nature. Now, I know for a lot of us that want to get into homestead and we get this idea in our head, I want to be out in the middle of nowhere where I don't got to deal with nobody if I don't have to. That's fine for some folks, but if you are a lifelong type 1 diabetic completely dependent upon your insulin, well, Diabetic emergencies can be scary, and if your emergency response time is 50, 60 minutes because you're so far out in the boonies, well, that can make the difference between living and dying. Living way out in the sticks, just hundreds of miles from a hospital, it might be fairly tempting until your mama and your daddy get a little bit older and you want to move them onto your property with you, and now you kind of need access to elderly care. So emergency response time, access to hospitals, access to pharmacies, that's all kind of stuff that you need to think through a little bit. You know, I like living to where I'm a 20-minute drive from a grocery store, but when the sun goes down at night, it's pitch black. That works really well for me. Emergency response time, because there's a volunteer fire department not too far away, it's about 10 minutes, which, I mean, that's kind of on par with national average, so that ain't bad. I'm really kind of happy with a happy medium that we found where we're definitely out in the country enough that we don't really have to be bothered a whole lot, but we're close enough to town that things are somewhat convenient if we need to go to town. But communication is something we did run into when we moved here. So we don't live in a dead spot for all cell service carriers, but we did have to change our cell service provider when we moved onto this property. I'll tell you what, service stopped at the gate. If you were down at the house, there wasn't no cell phone service at all. So if you had some sort of an emergency or you needed to make a phone call, you had to hike it all the way up to the road, top of the property, and get up to the road in order to get that cell phone signal. So communication is important because not a whole lot of folks have a landline anymore, so you need to make sure you have that cell coverage. In addition to that type of communication, let's talk internet. A big part of homesteading a lot of times is trying to make some money off your homestead. Well, you know, I mean, I think most people can agree, even if you're going out to farmers markets and things of that nature, having a bit of a business that has somewhat of an online base, it really helps to get messages out to your customers, make sales online, etc., etc. There's a whole lot of places where that internet coverage is horrible, to say the least. On our piece of property, we've got kind of an old school internet signal. It comes through the phone lines. But I'll tell you what, y'all, when we moved here from the Phoenix metro area, so we were in the city, the high-speed internet back then was no faster than what we have now here at the house. And in between then and now, we had that satellite internet, which has really slow speeds. So basically, we don't know what we're missing out on. Our internet signal is as good as we've ever had. And from what I hear, the power company's talking about running fiber optic cable out to all these homes out here on the outskirts at some point. So eventually we're going to have nice, actual high-speed internet, but we have a very good internet signal. Upload speeds are horrible, which makes YouTube a little bit difficult. Download speeds are just fine. I have no problem watching YouTube while my wife watches Netflix, you know, while a kid plays video games or something like that. We can do just fine with download speeds. So y'all, that's basically what we're going to touch on today. Don't be afraid of dirty properties because there could be a lot of treasures in that trash. Make sure you got access to good communications, whether that's cell phones, landlines, internet, etc., so that you can run your business, get a hold of people if you need to. Also pay attention to that location as far as like how close are you for hospitals, pharmacies, emergency services, etc. Make sure those zoning and restrictions are going to be supportive of the lifestyle that you want to live on your homestead, and check out what the power situation is, but don't be too worried about that one because we can get that one fixed. So that's it for this episode, y'all. It was a quick one. Last one was a little longer. Next one's going to be a little bit longer. But until I see y'all again, this has been Chris with Rockin Farm. Be happy, live healthy.